we were all, infantry troops used to death and destruction, but you don't get used to walking up the box charge and finding them full of bodies there's nothing but skin and bones. We didn't know what a concentration camp was. What you had were about a dozen or 15 civilian reporters from all over the world standing around corpses of German guards. They're not supposed to shoot unarmed prisoners of war. On the evening of the 28th of April, we slept in the woods. That was very unusual. The reason I remember is that it was very unusual because by that time, we're almost insisting that we get to sleep in homes. Well, here we are in the middle of woods, no homes available. Nobody digs a foxhole. All we do is just lie down on the ground and go to sleep. On the morning of the 29th, we get up and assemble to get our rations for the day. And the company commander, Bert Edmonds, says, "Guys, gather around. I have to give you special orders." Nothing like that had ever happened before. What I remember his doing is he alerted us to the fact that the division was in the vicinity of a concentration camp. And what I remember him saying was that in the interest of the war crimes trials that were going to follow the war, it was very important that all witnesses be kept alive. Well, this didn't mean anything to us. It turns out C Company had a very easy morning, stop and go. And along about 1 o'clock, we're stopped. And our runner from company headquarters comes to the platoon, and I'm standing right there, and he says, "C Company," that's us, "is going into a concentration camp to relieve I Company because I Company has gone berserk." Well, I Company is 3rd Battalion. We're C Company, 1st Battalion. So we're being taken out of our section to go over and help out. And we have to hike over there. The hike over there took about an hour or two. My recollection is that it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As we're approaching what turned out to be Dachau, nobody had mentioned a name. It just said a concentration camp. Even if they'd said Dachau, at the time it would have meant nothing to us because most of us didn't, the name Dachau wouldn't have meant anything. Well, we're on a road, paralleling the road on the left is a railway track. And up ahead we can see there's a train on these tracks. And we get up to the train. It's a train of boxcars. The doors on the boxcars are all open, and we make the horrifying discovery they contain this totally deformed bodies, nothing but skin and bones of human beings, still mostly in their striped uniform. And the experience just kind of blew the troops away. We were all, infantry troops used to death and destruction, but you don't get used to walking up the boxcars and finding them full of bodies there's nothing but skin and bones. And it turns out there were 39 boxcars sitting in a row, and we walked by all 39. And we would just stare at the bodies, and some of the eyes on some of the corpses were open. They were staring back at us. Nobody had anything profound to say. I remember just an occasional, my God, and then we just kept walking. Well, of course, at the time, we knew nothing about the origins of that train or what had happened. But we now know the whole story. And that train belonged as much to the history of Buchenwald as it did Dachau. Because in the first week of April 1945, 8 trains with almost 30,000 prisoners left Buchenwald, headed for camps in the east that had not been liberated. Well, this is the final month of the war. This is the first week of April. The war ends May 8th. The Allies have complete control of the air. Every day the Allied planes are pounding away at the German railway infrastructure. So these trains are constantly being delayed and rerouted. The train we came upon had left Buchenwald on April 7th with 4,500 prisoners jammed into 59 boxcars, headed for Flossenburg, another major camp. It's along the way rerouted to Dachau. It leaves Buchenwald on April 7th and arrives at Dachau April 28th, so it's en route 3 weeks with very little in the way of food and water. And life on those boxcars just became human zoos with people fighting for air and space and water and food. We know from the records that 816 prisoners survived the trip out of the 4,500. There were 2,310 corpses, and other corpses had been dropped along the way. Well, by that time, the administration of the Dachau camp had just collapsed. They'd run out of fuel, so they had to shut down the crematorium. So when this train arrived, they just left the 2,300 bodies in the boxcars. In the camp, people were dying, and they took the clothes off and threw the naked bodies in piles around the crematorium. And this is what my company had arrived the morning of the 29th. 42nd Division arrived about the same time. They went in different entrances. I Company was holding its prisoner in the coal yard. Well, after we go by the train, we come to an opening in the camp. It wasn't a big gated community, it was just an opening in the fence. It was at that point that our lieutenant says, "Okay, guys," as he's talking to our platoon, "fan out and look for guards." Well, in retrospect, you realize how absurd this was. This is a platoon of maybe 15 or 20 guys. And this is Dachau, 25 acres. Fan out and look for guards. But fan out we did. Some of our guys went to the right, some went straight ahead, and I went with a few others to the left. And I came very shortly to what was called coal yard. I didn't know it at the time. What you had were about a dozen or 15 civilian reporters from all over the world standing around corpses of German guards, SS. Nobody there to explain what had happened. We just assumed that it was I Company's handiwork, and it turned out to be. While we're there, one of our guys in my squad, I didn't see this, but when it actually happened, but all of a sudden I heard a reporter yell, "Hey, you can't do that." It was a reporter yelling at this guy. He had just cut the finger off one of the guards because he wanted the SS ring for a souvenir. Well, they're not supposed to shoot unarmed prisoners of war. So after the war, there was an investigation of the killing of the guards at Dachau. And the officer who did the investigation describes the 17 bodies in the coal yard that he examined. 2 of them had lost fingers. Not until several years ago did I learn who got the other ring. It was our supply sergeant of C Company. Turns out the reporters are from Australia, Canada, UK, America. I'm sorry I didn't speak to them and ask if any of them are from Minnesota or somewhere. I never did talk with him. But the Army, of course, knew where Dachau was, and in anticipation of the liberation, they had assembled this media group, and they brought them in. They were in there before we were. During the time we were there, I saw our guys round up 2 guards at a distance, not close up at all, and they took them back. It was a huge place, had a lot of buildings. Every building had to be searched. So it took a long time to make sure they were getting everybody. Now it turns out that Sparks was there, and Army photographers were there, and we have pictures of them shooting, of I Company, M Company machine gunners shooting the guards. But there was a lot of provocation. if you had been involved in coming upon that train, and then your next thing is you're immediately involved in rounding up several hundred German guards. Who knows what could have happened? There was so much provocation when you consider what the soldiers came upon. First, the dead bodies, and then 31,000 totally skin and bones, emaciated prisoners, and guards that were pretty haughty. You can understand that there was going to be problems. And that was the Army's conclusion too, eventually, that it just wouldn't have made sense to try to sort out responsibility for that. There were 39 boxcars with 2,310. That's just about 60, that's an average of 60 bodies per car. And they weren't, in there, placed in there. They just were all mixed up. The life in those boxcars had really become human zoos during their travels, and those people were just dying from starvation and deprivation, dehydration, and this life was all mixed